Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are absolutely not just summarizing some dusty old classic. We're going to uncover the specific, honestly almost magical genius behind Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. We'll be using the original text alongside a really fascinating 1894 critique by George Saintsbury to unravel exactly why this highly transactional world of 19th century courtship still completely captivates us today. And honestly, what better way to begin than with the single most famous opening sentence in the history of English fiction? It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Now, this isn't just a witty remark thrown in to get a chuckle, it's an absolute structural marvel that perfectly sets the stage for the entire narrative. In just one breath, Austen introduces the governing themes of her world: the undeniable power of money, the sheer, practical necessity of marriage, and the intense societal pressures that are going to drive literally every single action our characters take. Section 1. The Art of Jane Austen, Understanding Her Literary Genius. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the critical context it provides before we jump into the plot. Back in 1894, critic George Saintsbury noted that Pride and Prejudice commands this rare, incredibly deep personal love from its readers. But he also completely redefines a word critics frequently hurled at Austen, her so-called cynicism. You see, for Austen, cynicism isn't bitterness. It's not snarling or angry. It is simply the razor-sharp perception of the other side, the stark consciousness that human motives are almost always mixed. She takes this Epicurean, perfectly well-mannered delight in dissecting human folly and, frankly, roasting a fool. She sees the world exactly as it is, totally stripped of romantic delusion, and just finds the absurdity of it all highly amusing. To truly grasp her brilliantly sharp observational skills, Sainsbury points out her affinity to Joseph Addison's gentle, restrained humor, paired with Jonathan Swift's magical touch for pinpoint realism. But perhaps the best comparison is actually to master miniature painters like Memling. Austen doesn't paint with broad, sweeping, chaotic strokes. She doesn't need a massive, tragic canvas to make her point. Instead, it's like a giant puzzle. She's a master of building an airtight reality through a myriad of trivial, delicate, unforced strokes that miraculously bring a whole breathing world to life right before our very eyes. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 2. The Bennet family dynamics, a study in contrasts. Let's step right into this microscopic world and see that masterful reality in action, specifically inside the Bennet household. Everything in this novel stems from the dynamic inside this specific family. These gorgeous 1894 illustrations perfectly capture our fundamentally mismatched parents who are somehow responsible for the futures of 5 grown daughters. Just think about that setup for a moment. You have an entailed estate, very limited funds, and 5 young women who absolutely must marry to secure their survival. This pressure cooker of a household is the very engine that drives all the glorious drama. Austen brilliantly establishes the conflict and the comedy right in the opening chapter by contrasting their personalities. On one hand, you have Mr. Bennet. He's this odd mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice. Basically, he is a man of intellect who hides in his library to escape his family. On the other hand, Mrs. Bennet is a woman of mean understanding, little information, and an incredibly uncertain temper. Her singular, frantic obsession in life is getting her daughters married. It's an absolute recipe for domestic chaos, and Austen mines this mismatch for both deep tragedy and high comedy. So how does a man of sense like Mr. Bennet handle living with a woman so frantic and foolish? Well, he resorts to pure irony. "You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least." It's brilliant. This perfectly illustrates Mr. Bennet's ironic helplessness. Rather than fighting with her, he simply treats her ridiculousness as a source of endless personal entertainment. It's his highly amusing, yet ultimately kind of tragic method of dealing with his wife's frantic energy. Section 3. The Meryton Assembly. First impressions. Now, the isolated domestic bubble of the Bennet household completely bursts when the neighborhood hosts a local ball. The Meryton Assembly is the crucial space of first impressions. This is where the Bennet family finally comes face to face with the wealthy newcomers they've been endlessly gossiping about. And you have to understand the economics of this room. When a single man like Mr. Bingley walks in, a guy rumored to have an income of $4,000 to $5,000 a year, it immediately shifts the entire room's attention. The dancing, the music, the casual chatter, It all practically pauses as the local society calculates his worth and sizes him up as potential property for their daughters. But Bingley didn't come to the assembly alone, right? He brought his impossibly wealthy friend, Mr. Darcy, who boasts a staggering income of $10,000 a year. But look at how society reacts to them. By the end of the evening, Mr. Bingley is deemed lively and amiable. He danced every dance and is universally loved. But Mr. Darcy? Despite his immense wealth and handsome features, the tide of popularity violently turns against him. He is pronounced proud, above his company, possessing a forbidding countenance, and is universally despised. It brilliantly illustrates how quickly high society will turn on you, regardless of your bank account, simply due to terrible manners. And that public disgust is entirely cemented by the pivotal inciting incident of the entire novel. When Mr. Bingley tries to convince Mr. Darcy to dance with Elizabeth Bennet, Darcy coldly refuses, saying, "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me." Ouch! It is an incredibly harsh slight. But what's absolutely fascinating here is Elizabeth's reaction. She overhears this devastating insult, but she doesn't run away crying. No way. Instead, she playfully laughs it off and tells the story with great spirit among her friends. She takes his massive arrogance and immediately turns it into a joke. Section 4. Jane and Elizabeth, the sisterly debrief. Following Elizabeth's incredible resilience at the ball, the two eldest sisters retreat to their room to analyze the men they just met. This right here is the core emotional center of the book, where their entirely distinct worldviews truly clash. Austen uses their dialogue to perfectly frame the central prejudice that will govern the novel. Jane Bennet operates on this sweet, naive optimism. She quite literally never sees a fault in anybody and thinks everyone is inherently agreeable. Elizabeth Bennet, however, operates on razor-sharp realism. She is candid, she detests affectation, and she very clearly sees the follies and the nonsense of others. Jane wants to see the good in the world, while Elizabeth just insists on seeing the truth. Elizabeth's perspective is perfectly summed up when she tells Jane, "With your good sense, to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others." It's this beautifully affectionate but incredibly sharp critique of her sister's overly generous nature. Elizabeth prides herself on her own piercing judgment, completely unaware that her pride in her own perception might just be the very prejudice that will blind her as the story unfolds. This ties our narrative right back to why Saintsbury's and readers alike consider Elizabeth one of the absolute greatest heroines in all of English literature. Her supreme charm lies in her being exceptionally clever and strong-minded. Yet, despite her sharp tongue, she is entirely destitute of ill nature. She never attacks first. Above all, she possesses a perfect, natural fearlessness. She resents Mr. Darcy's ill manners in the healthiest way possible. She simply refuses to be intimidated by a man just because he is rich and powerful. She demands to be treated with respect, and she uses her wit as both a shield and a sword. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from today's explainer. So, what does this all mean? How do our own first impressions, pride, and social prejudices blind us to the true nature of those around us? You see, Austen's 19th century social dynamics aren't just dry history trapped on a page. They are a brilliant, shining mirror reflecting our very own modern lives. Let's be real. We all make snap judgments. We all let pride dictate our reactions. I hope this structured look at the opening chapters and critical foundations of Pride and Prejudice has not only clarified Austen's genius for you, but leaves you incredibly eager to read the rest of the novel. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep learning.